Chen, Ballad of the Border. Sworn to sweep away the Xiongnu tribes, or die trying. 5,000 marched out in brocade and marten fur. All lie in Tartar dust. Have pity for these bones beside shifting river, whose flesh still lives in spring bedchamber dreams. So we continue with the heptasyllabic quatrains, and we continue with the introduction of new poets. Each new poem here is the only contribution of one poet in the collection. In this case, this is Chen Tao, of whom we don't have that much of an amount of information. We know that he was probably from northern China, and that he went to Chang'an during the Taichung period, that is 847, 860, to study for the Jinshi examinations, but he failed repeatedly. He traveled home by way of some famous scenic locations, finally settled as a recluse on West Mountain in Hongzhou. When he died in the late 9th century, but probably before the collapse but clearly before the collapse of the dynasty, at least the final collapse, his friends Guan Shu, Cao Song, Fan Gan, and Du Xunhe all wrote elegies for him. So the poem that occupies us today is a pretty stereotypical one. We've encountered tons of poems like this before. This is an example of frontier poetry, which generally has as its topic and this is a very good example, the harsh life of the soldiers of the empire fighting in the frontiers. As usual, the tone is not epic or exaltative or optimistic. It's generally pretty dark, like Chinese classical poetry does not excel in the epic mode, and being a poetry created for and by Confucian scholars who were civil servants, not military servants, and who had a distinctly negative attitude towards excessive warmongering and campaigning. It's a poetry that, when it talks about war, as in this case, it puts the focus on the negative aspects of war. So here you have, so this poem really talks about, it's a very short poem, but it talks about the soldiers that went to fight for the empire in the frontiers. They're all dead now. Their dead bones lie scattered among the deserts of the northwest. And they only live in the memory of the beloved women, wives, etc., who still dream of them back home in the heartland. So always this sad, melancholy, really almost anti-militaristic sort of tone for this sort of poetry. The title, Ballad of the Border, in the original it says something like Lungxi Song. So Lungxi was one of the prefectures in the northwest of what is the heartland of China, in the modern area of Gansu. Longxi means west of Mount Long. Mount Long, southern part of the mountain of Liupan, is at the end of the Ordos Basin. So it's in the highway that leads from what is really China proper, the place that has been always populated by Han Chinese, towards Turkestan and the northwestern regions of Central Asia. Well, central regions of Central Asia, northwestern from the Chinese perspective, from the Chinese border. So this poem, as I said, is pretty conventional. Not much to say except reading reading again the two couplets and commenting on any other aspects. So first couplet: sworn to sweep away the Xiongnu tribes or die trying, 5,000 marched out in brocade and marten fur. All lie in Tartar dust. Sometimes, not in a quatrain because it's very short, apart from the element of the elegiac lamentation for the spoiled lives or unhappy deaths of Chinese in the frontiers. And remember, dying far away from home and having one's bones there is a horrible thing, because Chinese expected to be buried in their ancestral burial sites, and that was part of the ancestral religion and the cultural beliefs of the Chinese. So the idea of being left unburied with bones bleaching in desert sands in faraway areas was particularly horrible and loathsome to the scholar officials. So we've got this sad elegiac tone, that I've already mentioned. And so the first couplet, as we've said, it depicts our soldiers marching into the northwest. They're sworn, so they're brave people. So the first line makes it clear: sworn to sweep away the Shonyu tribes or die trying. Shonyu, a traditional name for the northern barbarians or in China since the Han Dynasty. Actually, during the Tang, the Xiongnu no longer existed. These barbarians were probably Turks, either the Eastern Turks or the Western Turks. In this area, the Western Turks or other Turkic groups that occupied these areas of the northwest of the empire. But just like in Byzantine literature, they use ancient classical Roman names for contemporary enemies that occupy the same space, and this gives also an archaic ring to the poem. So the soldiers went there. They marched out in brocade and marten furs. So the northwest is notoriously cold. It's the central Eurasian steppe with some very cold and deserts the steppe has extreme swings in temperature from the hot season to the cold season. So they were equipped with furs to protect them from the cold. So they're marching all the way there, and they've kept their oath of sweeping away the Tartars or dying trying. Well, many of them have died, and they all lie in the Tartar dust. We've already encountered this image. I think it was in a poem by Chen, or it might have been others, of the bones of the soldiers bleaching on the desert sands. So they have gone, and many, maybe not all, but a lot of them, 5,000 marched, and all lie in Tartar dust. They all died. This is a bit hyperbolic, but lots of casualties, and they lie there. So very melancholy and not at all celebratory or epic. And the second couplet: have pity for these bones beside shifting river, whose flesh still lives in spring bedchamber dreams. When these poems are longer, they sometimes dwell a little bit into the detailed description of an alien landscape, because these areas of the steppe, of the Eurasian steppe, have a climate and a geography and some characteristics that are very different from the Chinese heartland, the Yellow River Valley, and even the Yangtze River Valley. Here we just get an exotic sounding reference to a shifting river, which is probably one of those rivers in the area of Longxi, or in its whereabouts. So the first couplet was very elegiac. These soldiers went away, they died, their bones are there. The second line says, it's a bit like an exhortation, like in Greek or Latin epigrams: walk, stop and remember and think about these people. Where here it's reader, stop to think about and lament these brave people who died for us. So have pity for these bones beside shifting river, whose flesh still lives in spring bedchamber dreams. So there is this contrast in the last line. Of course, all these soldiers, these 5,000 soldiers, are dead, but they live on. But this is a very curious image that I'd like to comment. So how do they live on? The last line tells us that they live on in spring bedchamber dreams. That is, the women they've left behind, their lovers, their concubines, their wives, their girlfriends, they still keep them alive through dreaming about them. They don't know, or even if they know, they still dream about meeting them at night, which is also a very conventional topic. And it's based on a traditional belief of the Chinese that part of the soul could float away at night, or even in some people that died horrible deaths, their soul, part of the soul, wouldn't just go to the underworld, but would keep floating around. Anyway, these girls keep the memory of the soldiers alive some of them, by being visited in their dreams by their old lovers. So this is interesting. Like, a poem like this in the Western tradition would not establish this sort of immortality for the warriors. Like, the immortality here is the people who loved you still dream about you at home, your wives, your sisters, your lovers. Nothing epic at all. One would think that they would be remembered, or that the poet could say, you will be remembered because you gave your life bravely for the empire and for us, and you fought at the frontiers, and you will have immortal fame and glory for this. But nothing of the sort. It's really just, you live in the memory of the people. So, of the people who loved you and who lived with you and who still remember you. So very elegiac, very melancholic, perhaps very very modern in a way. This matches with our modern societies, which are very, very anti-militaristic and which, there's no exaltation of epic or fighting or war in our very civil contemporary societies. And this is one thing that unites us, at least with the values of the scholar official class of Tang China.